Good. All right. Thanks, Brock, and thanks everyone for tuning in or stopping in for our February Director's Cut. We're taking a look back at 2023. So we now have December of 2023 production in, and we can kind of take a look at the entire year. December production fell just slightly, 5,000 barrels a day, I guess just almost 6,000 barrels a day from November production. We were hoping for an increase of that amount, but went into the holidays and the beginning of winter, and so we were hoping to hit that 1.3 million barrel a day number by year end. We ended up just 2% short of that. Kind of put that in context, though, we started the year at 1 million barrels a day. So what you're looking at is a 27% increase in production from the beginning of 2023 to the end of 2023. And so that's pretty remarkable, since we were really only expecting like a 1 to 2% or pretty flat. What can we attribute that to? There's a couple of things. One of the biggest factors is that our drilled but uncompleted wells, our DUC wells, that inventory has been exhausted. So there were a couple hundred DUC wells that were completed with modern frac technology during the year. On top of that, we saw a major shift to 3-mile laterals and newer completion technologies in the Tier 2 area. And so all of the drilling in the Tier 2 geology has turned out to be every bit as productive as what we saw in the core or the Tier 1 geology. There are some issues and situations arising, and I'll try to touch on those. So in December, production exceeded the revenue forecast by 16%. Price was 7% below the revenue forecast, but today's price is back above revenue forecast. And you probably noticed, if you've been to the gas pump in the last 2 weeks, you can track that. So we're back in that North Dakota market, what I consider the sweet spot of $70 to $75 a barrel for oil. That really brings a robust capital investment without too much growth or any decline, operator to operator. It doesn't price gasoline out of the business, and so we can all pretty much live with where we're sitting, in that $2.70 to $2.90 per gallon gasoline price, and that $70 to $75 a barrel oil price. Gas oil ratio up just slightly. Natural gas production was up 1.6%. So we set a new record in terms of production, and we set a new record in terms of gas capture. 3.5 billion cubic feet a day produced, 3.35 billion cubic feet a day captured and put onto the market in December. Both remarkable numbers. We hung in there at right at 95% gas capture statewide, and get a little more granular on that when we flip the page and look at gas capture. Kind of the rig count is stable in the upper 30s, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about my trip to Houston. Wells being permitted is very steady, wells being completed very steady, and waiting on completion has virtually dropped down to no DUC wells. New record in terms of well count. 18,753 active wells producing in the state. There's one error in my printed director's cut. I showed that we reclaimed a site, using EJA grant funds in January, and we didn't. It was zero plugging and zero reclamations. You can see that crude oil storage is very low in the U.S., and crude oil demand is growing worldwide. So the DAPL tort lawsuit started this morning, and that is scheduled to run as long as a month in Judge Trainor's courtroom. So that could result in some really interesting things coming out. One of the big things I want to highlight on page 3 of my director's cut is natural gas prices. I believe it was last week, right at the beginning of the week, or maybe right at the end of the week before, the Biden administration said, we're putting all LNG export facility permits on hold. And they didn't really reveal the purpose for that. They talked about greenhouse gases and global warming, but the price of natural gas has dropped 50% in 1 month as a result of that. So North Dakota natural gas is bringing less than $1.25 an MCF. We have not seen prices that low since 1996. So we're back into the 1990s in terms of natural gas prices. That's going to make investment in natural gas transportation and transmission and gathering and processing really, really difficult. And so we will have to wait and see what happens as a result of that. Looking at gas capture, really good numbers, 95 to 97%. I decided to shift things a little bit on the gas capture section. And so what you see is I've identified 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 5, I guess I call them hot spots or problem areas. The oil fields by name that where gas gathering and gas capture is constraining drilling activity and really holding it back. And so you can see Divide County in the first section. You see Western Williams County in the second section. You see Northern McKenzie County and Northern Dunn County in the final section. And these were areas that industry talked to us about when I was in Houston last week. So these are areas where the Industrial Commission is going to try to focus some of that $3 million in grant funds for increased gas capture and decreased emissions. These are areas where we're going to try to sit down with the operators and the gas gatherers, see if we can't work out the bottlenecks here. In particular, that area in Western Williams County is actually resulting in some rigs moving to Montana from North Dakota by one operator, simply because they can't get the gas gathering capacity that they need to keep their drilling program running full bore there. I want to talk just a little bit about Fort Berthold activity. You can see we're back to 7 drilling rigs out there. But interestingly enough, we saw one specific case when I was in Houston last week where 87 wells are being prevented from being drilled because of the riverbed dispute in the Little Missouri River. And we know that there's probably 2 to 3 times that many that are being held up by the riverbed mineral dispute on the Big Missouri River. So it's the Big Mo, Little Mo problem. And as a result, Fort Berthold production has dropped about 50% from its peak. So, you know, we have a very serious issue there. We care very much about production and revenues on Fort Berthold and its support of the MHA tribe. And so that's going to need some attention over the next few months to work that out. There are 2 operators that we talked to that have really serious plans to develop that Little Missouri acreage using 3 and 4 mile laterals and be able to minimize or almost completely eliminate the need for new surface pads and roads by doing that. So it's a real issue, and we really are going to need to address that in a big way. When I talk about the federal issues, we had a hearing last Friday, here in Bismarck, status hearing on the BLM leasing process. Quite a few interesting things came out in the testimony of Samantha Ironshirt. We have requested a transcript of that because there are a large number of documents that she talked about that we don't have and haven't seen. Correspondence between BLM and U.S. Forest Service, and internal correspondence that we want to take a look at, because we feel like they're just not stepping up to the plate and nominating and leasing the tracts that are most important to North Dakota. One of the interesting comments that came out was that they have no priority system. It's simply whatever parcel they deem complete and put it on the proposed sale list. They have no system for prioritizing parcels based on, the ones that will bring the most money, or are the most wanted by industry. You saw that in the December sale. There were parcels that brought $50 an acre, and there were parcels that brought over $20,000 an acre. And so it's sort of mind-boggling that they don't have a process to prioritize the $20,000 an acre parcel, especially a government that's $34 trillion in debt. One would think that would really matter. Dakota Prairie Grasslands continues to work on their travel management plan, and we're very close to signing a memorandum of understanding between the state and the Forest Service on that. And then EPA published their final rule on the Quad O standards of performance for new reconstructed and modified sources and emissions. And North Dakota made the decision to become part of a coalition that's being led by West Virginia, a coalition of a handful of states. I think Oklahoma's in there, and North Dakota. But that opposition or challenge to that rule is going to be led by West Virginia. So let's talk a little bit about the trip to Houston. I got to sit in the CEO's office, or in a boardroom with 12 of our top producing companies and talk about their plans for 24, 25, 26. For the most part, not expecting a lot of growth, but based on the numbers they each gave me, somewhere between 10,000, 15,000 barrels a day increase in 2024. So we should, and that's on the low side. So we should see one more drilling rig, maybe two more drilling rigs in 2024, somewhere between 10,000, 15,000, maybe twice that much in terms of oil production. So we should hit that 1.3 million barrel a day number. Let me see. There are some issues with the Bureau of Indian Affairs on pipeline right-of-way that right now there are 8 wells ready to go on production that are being blocked by a pipeline right-of-way issue in the Mandaree area. And so that saga continues. We're seeing more and more companies, for example, one of our larger operators, well, actually 2 of our larger operators said 75% of their wells in 2024 are going to be 3-mile laterals. And they're respacing everything they can to 1920s. Couple of exciting things that you're going to hear about at the Williston Basin Conference. First of all, a lot of these folks are coming, and they're going to provide speakers and CEOs to be there and really talk about how important North Dakota is to them. We just docketed a hearing for a 4th enhanced oil recovery pilot for North Dakota. So XTO is getting in the game with enhanced oil recovery. We also found out that one of our majors is a partner in one of the ongoing enhanced oil recovery pilots. And so there's broader interest in that than what it would appear with 3 pilots ongoing. There are some issues, as I talked about, the riverbed minerals, the right-of-way issues, and one of the other issues that we're looking at is overpressure in the Dakota Formation. There are pockets of our disposal formation that have an elevated pressure, not more than the the formation geologically can handle, but enough to create some drilling problems for the oil companies. And so some of the companies are seeing as many as 50% of their wells are going to be drilled in those areas, and that makes the wells more expensive. So they're going to have to deal with that. Let me see. I think that is everything I wanted to talk about. Oh, we are going to see some new technology come to North Dakota. It's called eFrac. So Halliburton is going to be deploying at least one fully electric frac fleet to North Dakota. With their eFrac fleet and what they call their Octave AI, which is artificial intelligence actually running the frac pumps, they're able to pump 23 out of 24 hours in a day, just continuously while they're fracking on a pad. Now, the thing about that is that an eFrac fleet places a 30 to 36 megawatt demand on the grid when you drop it in there. So where does that electricity come from? We know that our Mountrail Williams grid is maxed out. And so we're gonna have to use some of our natural gas, that ultra cheap natural gas that we have now, to generate electricity. And of course, you know, Basin is building a big plant up there. And I think there are future plans maybe to build additional fossil fuel generation in northwestern North Dakota, as well as new transmission lines. But it's amazing what that technology looks like. It involves a very thin fiber optic cable that gets pumped into the well. It looks like a spool of fishing line, and when they started out at the surface, but it's 25,000 feet long, and they pump it down, and it's the full length of the well bore, and so they can measure the bottom hole pressures the entire time that they're hydraulically fracturing. It's expendable, so they don't try to pull it back out. The eFrac artificial intelligence is able to manage the pressures in milliseconds versus a human being on a diesel frac truck trying to shift gears and control the RPM. And so the efficiencies are really, really amazing in what we saw. And we're going to hear about all of that at the Williston Basin Conference. So we're kind of talking about the conference theme being more, more, and more. We're going to get more barrels out of every foot of lateral. We're going to drill more feet of lateral in every well. And we're going to get more recovery through enhanced oil recovery. It's interesting that we're within the next couple of months, we're going to break through the 5 billion barrel cume for the Bakken formation. That'll be a fun thing to announce, and we'll be celebrating that. But what these 12 operators said was we need to focus on the 295 billion that we haven't yet produced that's down there. And how much of that can we get at with new drilling, new fracking, new enhanced oil recovery technology. So the Bakken is far, far from over. In fact, continues to lead the way with a lot of these technology developments that then we share with our friends in Texas and New Mexico. That's all I got.
We had a couple of questions online here. First one, did any of the producers in Houston mention the election having an impact for future production?
It was a very common topic of discussion, and there are tremendous concerns about another Biden administration term and the types of decisions like LNG export, like pausing or minimizing federal leasing, like the methane rules and the methane fees and all of that. So it was a topic in almost every single discussion, and deeply, deeply concerned that another term for this administration will be very, very bad for the industry.
And then another one, how do the companies you met with see the Bakken fitting into their strategies? If not growth, then what?
Yeah, so all of them see the Bakken as a somewhat of a cash cow and also a slow growth opportunity. Their inventory varies from 4 or 5 years of drilling inventory to as much as 18. And one of the things that I think a really good gauge of that is the merger and acquisitions activity, and it is just continuous. Companies buying each other and consolidating, and there's going to be more of that in 2024. So these 12 folks all see a very long life for the Bakken, beginning with the technologies they're deploying in the Tier 2 geology and ending 40 or 50 years from now with the technologies that they're developing for enhanced oil recovery.
And then finally, any comments on your decision to retire, and what would you tell your successor in order to be successful in this role?
Well, I would have a lot to tell them, and just to comment, it has been an amazing time to be the oil and gas regulator in North Dakota, and I think we've really demonstrated how regulatory agencies can work with industry to keep them on track for the environment and public health and safety, and at the same time grow their capital investment and grow the state economy. So I'm just so grateful to have been able to sit here during this time. I would have a lot to tell my successor, but one of the things that I shared with the folks in Houston was one of their essential job functions will be to make the NAPE trip every other year. No other state does that. No other state travels to where the operators are and talks with them about the regulatory environment and the investment environment and what their plans are for the next 1, 2, 3 years. And so they are just incredibly appreciative of that. And so that's got to be one of the essential job functions for the next person.
So are we seeing new techniques and new substances used for enhanced oil recovery?
We are, Dave. And let me kind of start with, I was a little surprised. I was expecting more discussion of enhanced oil recovery. What I heard a lot more about was that our operators believe there is a lot of unstimulated reservoir in the Bakken. At the heels and toes of the wells, in the section lines, and even in all those wells that were drilled and fracked from 2006 through 2016, maybe 2020. Lots and lots of unstimulated reservoir rock that they want to focus on before they jump to enhanced oil recovery. And how are they going to do that? Well, things like eFrac and Octave AI. A lot of discussion about refracking and a lot of excitement about the tax incentive that the state put in place and wanting to improve and grow that. And quite a bit of excitement about doing things like drilling twin wells. So refracts sometimes have a lot of mechanical risk associated with them, working in that old well bore. But for not much more money, you can exit the old well bore and drill right parallel to it and get to new unstimulated rock using today's stimulation techniques. And so, a well that was fracked with swell packers and sliding sleeves in the late teens in North Dakota would have had maybe 50 fracture entry points. A well today would have 250. And so the same amount of frac fluid, same amount of sand, different mixtures. There's some new surfactants and chemicals to go into the frac fluid. One of them is called Boost. invented by Halliburton, and even our local company Credence has invented some surfactants, and they're doing extremely well. So that's the unstimulated reservoir technology. Now, enhanced oil recovery, a lot of excitement about the ability to reduce the surface pressure by using EOR, etc., which uses slugs of produced water mixed in with the gas stream so that the surface pressure is much lower, but the reservoir pressure is higher. And the gas that you inject, whether it's CO2 or produced gas, doesn't short circuit through the reservoir, but it stays around the wellbore and gets into those tiny pore spaces where the oil is still trapped. So that's one. The other technologies are foam and nanobubbles. So they figured out how to make extremely small microscopic sized bubbles in a foam that have the physical characteristics before they leave the wellbore of a ball bearing. But once they get into the wellbore, they release their gas and again move it into the tiny pore spaces in the rock. So a lot of excitement about new technologies and ideas being tested there.
So I thought I read something about natural gas being used for enhanced oil recovery.
You're right, Dave. So natural gas is the current thing that's being used in all the pilots because it's abundant and available. However, when you look at the total potential and how large the Bakken oil field is, there's only enough natural gas to do enhanced oil recovery in about 10% of it. So the other 90% requires carbon dioxide. Now, the interesting thing is carbon dioxide, at least in the laboratory, behaves just like our wet natural gas that we produce in the field. So it'll be a very quick and easy step to move from a pilot that used produced gas to a full-scale EOR project using carbon dioxide.
And we had one more question come in relevant to Houston, I believe, again. Because of the anticipated U.S. liquid natural gas export pause, was there more discussion from Bakken producers about sending more Bakken gas into Canada and their West Coast LNG facility?
That specific topic was not discussed. There was a lot of anxiety about the decision to suspend the LNG export permits, but nobody, I don't think, had really gauged the impact on natural gas prices yet at this point. So there was a lot of discussion about our efforts to move our natural gas to Cheyenne and then further south and west. So there's quite a bit of excitement about that, and maybe a couple of projects that haven't been announced that are being evaluated economically. But the potential to move natural gas north is very, very limited. Canada has more natural gas than it knows what to do with. And it is Mexico and the southern markets and the growing gap between production and demand in California that really are driving maybe some new homes for North Dakota natural gas. And so that's really kind of where the excitement is to try to move it to the south.
We had one more come in here. What was the main reason for the drop in production from November to December?
So the main thing that we saw was a drop in frac crew numbers. We went from 17 to 13. Winter hadn't really hit yet in December, but companies were getting ready. As we found out in January, they weren't ready. You can't get ready for -70 wind chill, but they were preparing for that. So they were already rolling back the number of frac crews and the count of the wells that they were completing. And so that was the primary reason, along with the fact that you have a long holiday week in December and people really kind of sit back and relax during that week. So we had that tiny drop in production. We were hoping for an increase, but the early part of December just didn't carry us through.
That's it from online question.
All right. Thank you, everyone, once again. Looking forward to that day that I can tell you we crossed that 5 billion barrel goal.
I'm ready. Okay, perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll just take a quick peek around the neighborhood here of oil production in our neighboring states sharing that same infrastructure system. We got some refresh numbers through South Dakota. They had some data issues, and Eastern Montana's caught up as well, as close as we can, but right around that 1.34, 1.35 million barrels per day when we look at the entire system as a whole. And so right now, Lynn had mentioned some of the competition when you look at that state line and where those rigs are going. Eastern Montana today has 2 active drilling rigs over on their side of the border. So we're going to continue to likely see fairly steady. I model that they're going to need a little bit more than that to get anywhere on the growth side of the curve. 1 or 2 rigs is going to continue to stabilize that production on that side of the border. If you look at the lower third of this graphic, we saw a pretty hefty increase in GORs for the month of December, coming up from that November level. We'll see how that continues here throughout the winter months. Again, this is one of those factors it's going to be the name of the game when we go forward here, looking at, even at relatively low rates of oil growth, making sure that we've got the natural gas solutions in place is going to remain at the forefront for the efforts going forward here. We did see a bit of a shift in the month of December on where those barrels that were being marketed out of the Williston Basin were headed. We saw a bit more barrels shifting onto the rail network. When we look at destinations and pricing around the U.S., even though PADD 5 is not quite as high as PADD 1, when we look at what those refiners are paying, the EIA, well, I'll quickly, right around 130, 150,000 barrels per day, just a little over 2 trains a month was my estimate. But the interesting thing on slide 8 is where those barrels were headed. So back in that environment where, at least in that late November timeframe, EIA was showing 100% of those barrels going to the West Coast. Again, they do typically refresh these, and we'll see if that holds. But we've not been in an environment where one marketplace had the entire market share, as we may be seeing here as we exit that 2023 timeframe. Pricing around the U.S. here, the one thing that we've noticed now for a couple of months is what's happening at that Clearbrook. So that is a negative $2.64 price. Trans Mountain expansion, still a lot of regulatory unknowns and construction completion unknowns with that. Once there's a little bit more clarity, we're hoping that the market, there was some early signals that the market would recover strong here in 2024. Over the last week or two, that's diminished. Now seeing largely that Clearbrook price in the futures markets reaching just above 0 before it goes back negative. So a month or so ago, it looked very positive that once Trans Mountain was in service, we'd be back up in the positive pricing for Clearbrook. That has since shifted. We'll keep an eye on it. It's the markets, they'll move. But right now, there's been a lot of pressure on those Clearbrook barrels, which then typically translate back into pricing here in North Dakota. In the month of December, I was very concerned that because of the turmoil in Canada and what was happening up there, that we would see an increase in our discount relative to West Texas Intermediate. We did see a hit. The average price for North Dakota barrel was $7.26 below WTI. I was fearful that we would have been closer to that $9 or $10 discount. So even though we did see an increase, it wasn't quite as severe as I was anxiously awaiting. But that said, we want to minimize that as much as we can. It keeps the Bakken barrel as competitive as it can be to these other plays, and it trickles back to those royalty owners, the taxpayers, and the producers themselves. Imports, exports, fairly steady. Saw an uptick in imports coming through. I suspect in the month of December, this does capture some rail movements with that congestion and pricing. I wouldn't be surprised if a chunk of that was an uptick in rail movements from Canada coming through on the CP rail line into the US in the same way that we saw an uptick in some of those Bakken barrels getting on rail cars in the month of December as the markets were in a bit of turmoil. No change on the natural gas capture numbers, 4% and 1%, same reasons that we continue to discuss. All the modeling that I'm doing going forward is that we continue over the next 5 to 10 years that number, even though it's hitting those state targets, that we're going to continue to see aggressive efforts to minimize that as much as possible. I'll bump forward to slide 13. Again, we saw less completions and less new wells producing gas. Positive news, the gas gathering, that mild month, they did not get behind. Typically, once you start getting into winter, it gets more and more challenging to get wells connected, make sure they're online. So the month of December, we did not see those issues. The EIA, this is just their updated price. They're anticipating we get up and hit that $80 level before some downward movement, but still relatively strong. These are numbers that would keep the Bakken very competitive, very economic in this window of time. Dave, I was looking forward to this slide for you. You'd always been asking about when were we going to hear about that next natural gas processing plant expansion. Hess Midstream did make that announcement that in the year 2027, they've got plans for another 125 million cubic feet of gas processing in their system. So that's the little green bar that you see added on now to this graphic. That is certainly not the only company looking at potential expansion. So as we continue to get details out there, we'll continue to stack on those solutions. We know that's not the end all be all, but it's encouraging to see things discussed publicly, get them on the timelines, construction starting in 2025 for that project. So very encouraged at those steps that folks are continuing to take to position themselves at least that far in advance, and that level of planning is critical to the success here. When we look at what's the next piece, the one thing that I think is going to be the one largest challenge that consumes most of my time is on the residue gas. This is something we continue to talk about. The localized gathering, compression, localized processing, those are things that through DMR, through the Public Service Commission, we've got mechanisms to make those happen in a timely manner. Some of these larger interstate systems continue to be the one thing hanging over our head to make sure that we've got that in place. When we look at what the dynamics look like today, we always talk about northern border in this meeting, back up to around that 80+% market share, same trajectory. The one thing that has been publicly talked about is Lynn had mentioned on some of the oil side that low single digits growth potentially for the state. Others on the midstream side looking at the gas stream, somewhere 30+% growth between 2023 2026, and so those are substantial volumes of gas that we're going to continue to have to wrap into the system to see where that infrastructure can take place. And then because of that increasing market share on border, just a quick refresher of where those BTU levels are. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I'm just curious, when's the last time you had a major outage on a pipeline or natural gas?
As far as, so the question, if anyone online didn't hear it, the last major outage on I'm going to assume you're talking a residue interstate type system. There's been a number of compressor facility outages. Trying to recall some of the dates. I remember that was earlier in kind of Q2, Q3 of 2023. There were some compressor outages. So not an entire system being out of service. That's this critical infrastructure. They do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. But it's not uncommon to see either maintenance or unexpected outages at compressor stations, which reduces capacity.
And the follow-up, and I don't know why I'm asking this question, but January weather was a bit of a challenge, except for those of us who went to the Panama Canal. Are we expecting that to have some issues? Would that possibly have caused some outages?
So just looking, Brock, if you want to pull up that slide 16 there. So in January, what we experienced was very real and immediate challenges to keeping North Dakota's oil and gas wells safely in service. And so in North Dakota, when that occurs, the natural gas production with those oil wells immediately drops off as well. And then so that scenario with the cold that had blanketed the U.S., there was a very, very strong demand from all corners. And when a region like North Dakota was not producing at the level that it previously had been, we saw a large influx of Canadian gas backfilling North Dakota as it reduced its production level. So when someone thinks about this is mission critical for these systems and why they operate the way they do, and when you think about that relationship, even from the U.S., very reliant on Canadian natural gas to keep citizens safe, keep business and commerce moving. I know a lot of politics and things get wrapped into different pipeline systems and crossing international borders. This is a situation where, again, we're very thankful for our allies to the north providing the natural gas we needed here in the U.S. during an otherwise dangerous time. With that, thank you very much.